And this is Bloomberg Technology. Coming up, SoftBank's endgame. Masayoshi Son makes another run at the U.S. cable market with a direct offer for Charter. Why the move to acquire America's second biggest cable company is the Japanese billionaire's most ambitious target yet. Plus, the Model 3 kickstarts a new era in electric cars. But will Tesla deliver on its promise to the mass market? I check out Elon Musk's most affordable car yet, and we look ahead to Tesla's earnings report coming up. And all bets are on. After 400 million shares of Snap hit the open market, we'll look into the impact of today's lockup expiration now that Snap's earliest investors have had their first opportunity to sell. First to our lead. The turmoil continues in Washington. Anthony Scaramucci has been removed from his new job as White House Communications Director just 10 days after he joined President Trump's staff. The White House said in a statement, quote, Mr. Scaramucci felt it was best to give new Chief of Staff John Kelly a clean slate and the ability to build his own team. Earlier Monday, White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders commented on the exit at the White House briefing. Take a listen.
He does not have a role at this time in the Trump administration, and we put out a statement earlier announcing that, and I don't have much else to add beyond that.
We're joined now by Bloomberg's Alex Wayne in our Washington bureau. Alex, boy, that was fast. What do we know about exactly what went down behind the scenes?
It was a memorable 10 days, wasn't it? Here's what we know. Either Anthony Scaramucci decided to resign and offered his resignation to John Kelly, the new Chief of Staff, or John Kelly, the new Chief of Staff, asked him to resign, exerting his authority over the White House on his first day on the job. Something that Sarah Huckabee Sanders said after she told everybody she wasn't going to talk about it anymore was that John Kelly now has total authority over all other personnel in the White House. Everybody answers to him now. That wasn't the case before he came on the job today. Even Steve Bannon, even Jared Kushner report to John Kelly now. That before him, they reported directly to the president.
Interesting. So what moves do we expect John Kelly to make? How is he going to remake the White House team in his image?
I think this was the big one, and Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that nobody else in the senior staff is going to leave immediately. One outstanding question is Sean Spicer's future. He quit 10 days ago, the same day that Anthony Scaramucci started his job. We wonder now whether Sean Spicer might return to some kind of a role in the White House, maybe communications director. That job's open.
We've yet to hear anything from Scaramucci. I mean, any word on his view of how this went down?
No. You'll remember last week the New Yorker published a really inflammatory interview with Scaramucci in which he profanely criticized both Reince Priebus and Steve Bannon. That interview did not go over well in the White House, I think it's safe to say. And since then, he's been very quiet. He hasn't returned our calls or our emails and text messages. You haven't seen him out on television. Before that interview, he was a big advocate for the president on television. He's gone radio silent since then, and he's not talking today.
All right, well, I've got his Twitter account up. I'll let you all know if anything changes or a tweet crosses. Alex Wayne of Bloomberg News for us in Washington. Thanks so much, Alex, for that update. Now to a story we continue to watch. Masayoshi Son wants in on the U.S. cable market. SoftBank is determined to use Charter Communications to get there, one way or another. SoftBank is said to be planning to make a direct offer for Charter. This after Son's initial gambit failed and Charter rejected an earlier merger proposal by wireless carrier Sprint, which is controlled by SoftBank. Bidding for Charter would mark the most ambitious target yet for Sun, with the company valued at $101 billion. So, does SoftBank have the capital to get the deal done? Joining us now, Bloomberg Tech's Peter Elstrom, who's in town from Tokyo, and Paul Sweeney of Bloomberg Intelligence. Peter, I'll start with you. What exactly are Sun's aims here?
Well, Sun has been looking for some sort of solution to the Sprint business. He bought into the Sprint business when it was the #3 wireless carrier in the U.S. It's since fallen behind T-Mobile. It's now #4. Originally, it looked like the simplest deal was to combine Sprint and T-Mobile together. He tried it before. It looks like there's a more accommodating administration now in the White House. But Given that that option now is a little bit complicated, he's looking for something more ambitious, therefore the gambit for Charter. Charter came out over the weekend and said, we want no part of Sprint, we don't plan on merging with them. So now sources have been telling us that Masayoshi Son is looking for a bigger deal where SoftBank and Charter together would be combined with
And
Sprint.
is Charter more likely to do a deal if it's coming directly from SoftBank?
Charter's management has been very clear that they don't want this deal. It's run by the management team there has been very successful. Tom Rutledge has been successful in the CEO position. They think they're able to push up the stock price on their own. They don't feel like they need to buy this struggling wireless business in order to do better themselves.
Paul, what are you hearing in terms of the willingness or unwillingness on Charter's side?
Yeah, I think, Charter really has no interest in Sprint per se, at least not at the current valuation. The question for the big cable companies, Charter and Comcast, is, do they need to offer a wireless business? And if they do they actually need to own the economics of a wireless company, or can they just partner with an existing wireless company? Last week, Comcast CEO Brian Roberts said, we don't need to own a wireless company. We're happy just partnering up with the existing wireless companies. And that's Charter's kind of been in that camp as well. The real question for I think a Masa-san deal with Charter and SoftBank would be, what does John Malone want to do? John Malone, once again, is involved in this transaction. He is a significant shareholder of Charter. And the question is, does he want to get in bed with Masa-san and all the issues associated with that highly levered company in Japan?
Let's talk about the logistics, Peter. Does SoftBank have the capital to pull this off with all the debt they already have?
Well, Masayoshi Son has been very creative in terms of coming up with capital to be able to do things. Of course, just a few weeks ago, he closed this vision fund, the SoftBank Vision Fund, with initial capital commitments of $93 billion. He said he wants to take that to $100 billion. Remember that in Japan, the banks have lots of cash. They're offering negative interest rates to a lot of their borrowers, and they're able to lend. And SoftBank has been a pretty solid bet for these banks in the past. So it is possible that he would be able to cobble this together. Another very important point is that they own a stake in Alibaba that right now is worth more than $100 billion. So if there's a way for them to extract some of the capital from there, they may be able to use that cash to go after Charter and put together some sort of deal. It'd be very creative. It'd be enormous, of course, and it'd have a lot of risk built into it. But it seems like Masa would be able to get the cash.
Paul, how would this shake up the overall ecosystem?
This would be a big transaction. As Peter mentioned, there are 4 wireless players in the U.S. That's arguably one too many. So there's always been, a real pressure within the industry, the wireless industry in the U.S. for the 3 and 4 players to get together, T-Mobile and Sprint. That makes the most strategic logic here. But to the extent that Sprint can't get a deal done, it has been really looking for any partner whatsoever to do a deal with to shore up its balance sheet, to try to improve its competitive position in the marketplace. And Charter is just the latest list, latest name on that list.
Now, Peter, we've also reported that SoftBank planned to take a big stake in Uber, that some of Uber's investors at least wanted this to happen, and that Travis Kalanick actually started negotiating this deal before he resigned. Now there are reports this isn't happening. What do we know?
Well, it's interesting to see how Son has been interested in this ride-hailing business. He's invested in many of the major players throughout Asia. Didi is the biggest player in China. Of course, he put $5 billion into that company and the largest venture capital investment ever. So he's looked at Grab in Southeast Asia and Ola in India. Uber would add to that collection. It would give them kind of a global presence in ride-hailing. It's not clear at this point whether antitrust regulators would be okay with that or whether Uber's backers, including Kalanick, would be okay with that deal.
All right. We'll keep watching. Peter Elstrom from Tokyo in town. Paul Sweeney of Bloomberg Intelligence, thanks so much for joining us. Well, Snapdeal has rejected a $950 million acquisition bid from rival Flipkart. The 2 biggest local players in India's e-commerce space had discussed joining forces to better compete against Amazon. SoftBank, which owns almost a third of Snapdeal, had pushed the merger. Snapdeal opted instead to sell off some non-core assets. Coming up, Spotify sets its sights on Apple by slowly beefing up its podcast efforts. We'll dig into what it means for its potential IPO. And Bloomberg Tech is live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. This is Bloomberg. A stock we are watching, Pandora shares surging as much as 7% in after-hours trading. The company posted better than expected second quarter revenue of $377 million. That's up 10% year over year. This is Pandora's first earnings report since the company sold a 19% stake to SiriusXM and dismissed CEO Tim Westergren. Sticking with music streaming, the #1 paid music streaming service Spotify is expanding its business model again. This time, Spotify is eyeing its growing demand for podcasts, a fast-growing field currently dominated by Apple. The play is an attempt to experiment with new media, increase the time customers spend with its app, and most importantly, boost ad sales. Here with more on the European startup, Bloomberg's Caroline Hyde with us from London. So Caroline, tentative steps here for Spotify. What have they agreed to so far?
Yeah, Emily, they seem to have agreed to a bit of back scratching so far. They will start to promote podcasts. They'll do it within the app itself. They'll do it within advertising that you might see on the side of a bus or on perhaps a billboard. In return, well, some of the podcasts will start promoting Spotify. For example, podcasts such as Reply All, Pod Save America, one called the Bill Simmons podcast. So there's a bit of a deal going on here. But actually, if you've had your eye peeled on Spotify, if you're an addict to it already, you might have already seen that there's a new tab in it for podcasts. I had to scroll through it earlier. There's already the Tim Ferriss show on it. You can go into Andreessen and Horowitz's podcast. They're already available. And this is something that they've been playing at behind the scenes. They commissioned some original content just purely on the music business. But we understand now that they're expanding that. They're going to be commissioning a new batch of original podcasts in the next coming months. So clearly this is a key move.
Is this all about diversifying the business model before an IPO?
I think it is. I mean, that share listing that we're approaching is coming in October, and they're looking to really ramp up where they're going to be getting their revenues from, because they have to give away so much in terms of royalties to music labels. It's frustrating. So they're looking at new areas of growth, new areas of wooing new advertisers. No wonder then, when there's all the teens and adults in America, there's about 15% of them listening to a podcast per week. This can be monetized. We understand that the advertising revenue from podcasts is set to grow 85% alone this year. This could be more than $200 million. It not only helps, though, with advertising, but it also helps with addiction to the Spotify app itself, because they don't want you suddenly going into an Apple app while you're using the likes of Spotify. They want to keep you drawn. They don't want you going into rivals such as SoundCloud, such as Pandora has its own podcast as well. You were just talking about that company, as does iHeartRadio. So it really wants to keep you addicted overall. But what's interesting is maybe the music labels don't really want them dabbling around the scenes with podcasts. They like the fact that finally Spotify has injected some growth into the music industry. And notably also they've played around with television as well and with video, and that hasn't quite worked to that extent. But we'll see how they ramp up podcasts ahead of the listing.
So let's talk about SoundCloud, which is also, of course, based in Europe. And Spotify was at one point eyeing SoundCloud. What's going on with them?
Another desperate attempt, it would seem. I mean, I feel sort of sorry for this company, because it was such a beacon of growth and such a stand-up performer in Europe. And when I was over in Berlin, I used to talk to them a lot. But they have had real problems. They've just been closing offices in London, in San Francisco. They had to axe 40% of all their workforce. And now it seems they're looking to sell their stake, majority stake, in two separate private equity companies. Now, we don't understand which ones they might be, but we understand that they're close to deals with selling these two particular stakes. It would hand over them a control of SoundCloud, but notably it would give them some cash to keep funding themselves, because this is still a company that is loved by independent musicians in particular. To get this, they have like 175 million unique users per month. Compare that to Spotify that has 140 million, but 175 million uniques monthly. It's not always apples with apples, but still there are a lot of people that love the content that SoundCloud brings. They've just never really been able to monetize it, never been able to charge that much of a subscription. That hasn't got off the ground enough to make them money. And so now it seems like another area they're trying to push in just to keep themselves afloat. Remember, they couldn't sell themselves to Spotify. We understood that Spotify just wasn't going to take the 1 billion euros that they wanted. And so now it looks as though private equity is the way out. But the deal's not done yet. We understand it could still all unravel, Emily.
All right. Thank you so much, Caroline Hyde, for all the twists and turns there. Caroline with us from London. Coming up, Apple complies with Beijing's request, removing VPN or virtual private network apps from its store in China. We'll discuss the decision later this hour. Plus, so here it is, the brand new Tesla Model 3. And the big question is, will this be just another electric car or a car that will change the future of all cars? A big takeover in the cable TV business. Discovery Communications has agreed to buy Scripps Networks, the parent of HGTV and the Food Network. The deal is valued at $14.6 billion, including debt. It could help Discovery cut costs, gain negotiating leverage with distributors, and expand internationally. Tesla continues to fall after unveiling its Model 3. However, optimism about the electric car has contributed to the shares climbing 53% this year. Elon Musk said ahead of Friday's event that Tesla had taken in more than 500,000 deposits at $1,000 apiece. So will the car live up to the hype, and will it appeal to the masses? Joining us now for more, Bloomberg Tech's Dana Hull, who covers all things Tesla. Elon came driving up on the stage in that Model 3. He jumped out like he was a rock star at that event on Friday, which I attended. What are the reviews so far about the Model 3?
The early reviews are very positive. I mean, this is clearly part of the Tesla DNA. It feels like a Tesla. It was designed by the same design team. You look at it compared to an S and an X, and it's like part of the Tesla family. So from what I've read so far, people are pretty happy with it.
The big question, of course, here he is. We have to watch. Here he is, stepping out of the car. Lots of applause. The big question, of course, is can Tesla deliver? And there was this moment on stage where he acknowledged, yes, we are entering production hell. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Frankly, we're going to be in production hell. Welcome. Welcome to production hell. Where we are for at least 6 months, maybe longer. But you guys know that you're veterans. I've been through this. So I look forward to working alongside you to journey through hell. And as the saying goes, if you're going through hell, keep going.
He's saying they can make 20,000 Model 3s a month by December.
Right.
Do you believe it?
So that's a very steep production ramp. And that's, I think, why you're seeing shares fall a little bit today. I mean, the Model 3 launch event was supposed to be their big event. We thought he would be like, woohoo, the car is here. The fact that he talked about production hell after they went through production hell already with the Model X was a little bit surprising, because I thought that the Model 3 was designed for manufacturing, was going to be easy, that they'd learned all their lessons. So I think he's signaling that this ramp is going to be challenging. He's still holding to the volume figures, but are they going to be produced with consistent high quality? That remains to be seen. You've also reported on turnover at the company, especially in the executive ranks. How could that impact their ability to get it done? I mean, Tesla has always had kind of turnover, as many tech companies in Silicon Valley have. I haven't heard of any high-level production executives leaving recently, but I think there's a big question about autopilot. I mean, you've seen turnover on the autopilot team. The reviews that I've read thus far have not included cars that had autopilot, so I'm not quite sure where that stands or if they're waiting for the next version. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of risks. There's also a lot of opportunities. That's what makes the stock so compelling.
Now, when you look at the numbers, the majority of people are buying cars for less than $25,000. This car is $35,000. It's even more if you do some of the add-ons. Is this really going to reach a mass market?
Yeah, I think that's what a lot of investors have held on to. It's $35,000 is bare bones. If you want a color besides black, if you want autopilot, if you want the premium interior, if you want a longer range battery, you quickly get to $59,500, which is the sort of fully loaded car. So mass market, I mean, to me, $59,000 is not mass market. And then there's the big question of the tax credits, which phase out over time, and they're not making the $35,000 car until later this fall. So I think there's a question as to wherever you are in the queue and what kind of car you get, whether you're going to qualify for that tax credit or not.
So earnings coming up, what are we expecting?
Kitchen sink. I mean, is he going to talk about China and their plans to manufacture in China? That's a huge market. Is he going to talk about autopilot parity? What are these production challenges? And what's happening to sales of the Model S and the Model X? I mean, are they being cannibalized by the Model 3? Is there an Osborne effect going on? How are they going to get people to buy, people that are waiting for 3, can they sell them in S instead? I mean, you need to sell cars while you're producing this one. At the same time, you have some people out there saying the Model 3 launch could be as big as the iPhone. And it brings me back to that question that I asked, is this going to be just another electric car, or a car that's going to change the future of how we all use cars, of cars in general? What do you think? Well, I think it's unheard of and unprecedented in the auto industry for there to be 500,000 reservations for a car that is not out yet. I mean, that's amazing. That 500,000 people, largely in the U.S., have placed deposits for a car that they may not get until 2018, 2019 is pretty unheard of. But are those reservations going to actually translate into sales remains to be seen. All right, Dana Hull, our Bloomberg tech reporter who covers Tesla, will be all over Tesla earnings later this week. Thanks so much. My pleasure. For stopping by. Coming up, Snap shares trade at peak volumes as insiders have their first chance to sell. We'll look at what's ahead for the company ahead of next week's earnings report. And if you like Bloomberg News, check us out on the radio. You can listen on the Bloomberg Radio app, Bloomberg.com, and in the U.S. on SiriusXM. This is Bloomberg.
I'm Mark Crumpton in New York. You're watching Bloomberg Technology. Let's begin with a check of your first word news. Deputy White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders says former Communications Director Anthony Scaramucci has, quote, no role at this time in the administration. Sanders reiterated today that new Chief of Staff John Kelly is now in charge.
As I think we've made clear a few times over the course of the last couple of days to several of you individually, but General Kelly has the full authority to operate within the White House, and all staff will report to him.
The Trump administration is imposing sanctions directly on Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro following Sunday's vote to rewrite his country's constitution.
Let me just say, I said this generally, we very much believe that sanctions do work, and we will continue to monitor the situation and consider additional sanctions.
The Treasury Department's designation is an unusual move against a foreign leader. An official crucial to running Kenya's upcoming presidential election who'd been reported missing a few days ago has been found dead. The Electoral Commission's chairman said the official's body showed signs of torture. There are concerns about further violence as Kenya transitions to biometric technology to reduce voter fraud. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. It's just after 5:30 p.m. Monday here in New York, 7:30 Tuesday morning in Sydney. My colleague Paul Allen has a look at the markets. Paul, good morning.
Good morning, Mark. Well, it's looking a bit flat around the Asia-Pacific today. Nikkei futures are looking a little weaker. We're waiting on earnings from Sony, Honda and Mitsubishi UFJ. ASX futures looking kind of flat as well, but the miners will once again be in focus. We saw another big surge for iron ore overnight. SGX Asia Clear up 7% on the strong Chinese manufacturing data that we saw on Monday. And futures for iron ore Dalian delivery hit the limit up. Now, the iron ore price and US dollar weakness, that's been propelling the Aussie dollar along quite strongly, so expect Australian dollar to feature as part of the commentary from the Reserve Bank's cash rate decision today. The cash rate expected to stay on hold at 1.5%, but as I say, the dollar's been creeping up, so we might see a little bit of jawboning from the governor there. Elsewhere, we're waiting on South Korea July CPI. That's expected to show some strength, climbing to 2.1% year-on-year. China Taishin Manufacturing PMI Composite and Services, and the Samsung Air JY Lee is going to be back in the courtroom in South Korea. I'm Paul Allen in Sydney. More from Bloomberg Technology next.
Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. Now to Snapchat. Snap shares feeling the pressure. The parent company of Snapchat dropped 1% Monday after a roller coaster day of trading. Inside shareholders got their first opportunity to sell since the March initial public offering. Joining us now for more Bloomberg Technology, Sarah Fryer, who covers Snapchat. And we actually have a chart that shows trading volume today. 49 million shares of Snap traded today compared to an average of 15 million. So a lot of activity out there. What's going on?
It is the first day that some of the insiders can sell their shares, and so obviously when you're going from being a private company with very small valuation, now it's public. But I think the reason we haven't seen the stock drop, as many people were predicting, I mean, it dropped 1%, but not any crazy margin, is because it's already near its all-time low, and it's not. It's too close to the earnings report where people are going to get a lot more information about the company's trajectory.
And that's coming up in a couple of weeks.
That's coming up on August 10th. And so people are trading and there's a lot of interest, but there's not a lot of new information. So
what are we expecting to hear on August 10th?
Everyone wants to know about growth. Both growth in terms of the user base and growth in terms of the revenue. The last earnings report, I think you remember, stock dropped incredibly, more than 20%, because of concerns that the company was just not growing as exponentially as people expected them to, given all of the excitement around the IPO.
Is this typical? I mean, with Facebook, with Twitter, did this happen when the lockup expired?
Yes, it always puts a lot of pressure on the stock, and there's always a spike in volume. But some insiders are going to have to wait a little bit longer to sell. So this is just one of many lockup expirations we've seen, and we don't actually know how many shares were available to be sold today. There's some estimates out there. JP Morgan was saying probably around 400 million.
There's also concerns about executive turnover. We've heard reports of more executives leaving.
Right. They just replaced their head of HR and their head of legal. This is something we definitely saw at Facebook after their IPO. A lot of people who have been there for a long time and taken the company public, they feel like they've accomplished something and then they're ready to move on. But there are always a mix of reasons. We can't say for sure whether that's
And Evan Spiegel has always maintained that copycatting is a form of flattery. Do we think he'll change his tune when it comes to this quarter and Facebook making even more moves on Snapchat?
I think that is top of mind for all of the analysts covering Snap right now. Why isn't Evan more scared about Facebook and all that they've done to copy the product? The company is sort of holding fast in their claim that they have something completely different, and it might be to their detriment, because one of the things that they've been saying is that they don't quite care as much about people having more friends than they do. They're willing to keep it a small community. They don't want to be like Facebook in terms of getting to the network to be so big that it becomes less intimate and less cool. But what might happen with that is it might hamper their ability to grow this network and therefore be a more formidable company in terms of attracting advertisers. So that could be one area that people definitely drill down on August 10th.
All right. Well, I know you will keep us updated as we get closer to that earnings report. Sarah Fryer, who covers Snap for us, thanks so much for stopping by. Well, over the weekend, hackers exposed flaws in U.S. voting machines at the cybersecurity conference DEF CON. The first vulnerability was found within 90 minutes. Concerns about election hacking spiked after U.S. intelligence groups said Russia had attempted to interfere with the 2016 presidential election. Joining us now from Washington, Anthony Ferrante, Senior Managing Director and Head of Cybersecurity at FTI Consulting, a business advisory firm. So, Anthony, what's your reaction to the fact that in 90 minutes, a voting machine could be hacked?
Hey, Emily, thanks for having me on today. I think this is a really serious topic. Really serious topic involving our electoral process. Given the current climate, this exercise, this was a necessary exercise as we work, as the cybersecurity community works to understand the vulnerabilities in our electoral process, in our electronic voting machines. I applaud the cybersecurity community. I think it's a necessary step as we work towards a more secure electronic voting machine. Not enough attention has been given to this topic over the years, and I definitely think it's a step in the right direction.
Interestingly, you've got federal and state officials saying it would be extremely unlikely for hackers to actually try to change votes, to manipulate vote tallies. Does that matter?
Yeah, I mean, of course that matters. And the reality is...
What's the point of hacking a voting machine if you're not going to change the results?
Well, of course, we want to ensure that the public has confidence in the devices that they are walking up to and using to cast their ballot. To actually affect an election at the scale that is necessary would be extremely difficult to do without being detected. And the research has gone into this over the last few years, and most certainly leading into the 2016 presidential election. But it doesn't negate the fact that we still want, the community recognizes this as an important topic, and we still want to take necessary steps to ensure that people have confidence, the public has confidence as they cast their ballot in whatever election, presidential or state or local election.
You used to work at the FBI. Curious about your thoughts on state-sponsored hacking, especially when it comes to Russia. What is the biggest risk?
I mean, there are many risks involved with cybersecurity, and that is one thing that we do when we work with our clients, is we advise them, you have to understand your threat landscape. What are these attackers, what are these malicious cyber actors going to try to do to your firm? And there are many different malicious cyber threats that exist on the public internet. And so, of course, including nation-state and criminal syndicates. So, of course, the risks vary. They run the gamut, and it is our job as a cybersecurity community to identify those risks and help educate people so they can manage those risks and minimize the effects of those cybersecurity risks.
So when it comes to something like voting machines, is there no such thing as hack-proof technology? And if that's the case, what's the best option?
Well, I don't think this is just a voting machine problem. I think as our technology continues to evolve over the next 10 to 20 years, look, remember, back when President Obama was elected to office, the iPhone had just been introduced. Instagram was just gaining popularity, and Bitcoins didn't even exist. Now those are all commonplace technologies that we use every single day. So the reality is that as technology continues to advance, we need to stay one step ahead of that technology, and we need to identify those cybersecurity risks and try to minimize those risks to certain entities. And that's what we can do as a cybersecurity community. That's what our government can do for their people, is they can work diligently to get in front of those risks, identify them, and try to get in front of them so they don't actually have any negative effects on the people or the people using those technologies.
All right, Anthony Ferrante, Senior Managing Director and Head of Cybersecurity at FTI Consulting. Thanks so much for stopping by. And another hacking headline, HBO says hackers have stolen upcoming programming. And according to reports, the theft includes a script from a yet-to-be-aired episode of Game of Thrones. HBO chairman did not acknowledge in a message to employees that there was a, quote, cyber incident. Excuse me, they did acknowledge that, which resulted in some stolen proprietary information, including some of its programming. Coming up, China is tightening internet access, and that is causing Apple to make a change in the App Store. We'll tell you all the details next. And a reminder of our new interactive TV function. You can find it at TV Go on the Bloomberg. You can watch us live. If you miss an interview, you can go back to it. You can send our producers a message, play along with the charts that we bring you on air. This is for Bloomberg subscribers only. Check it out at TV Go. This is Bloomberg. Now to a new development in a story we've been monitoring. Apple has removed some virtual private network apps from its stores in China. This move puts Apple in line with China's decision earlier this year to ask all developers offering VPNs to obtain a government license. VPNs are popular in China as they help users get around the Great Firewall, a system used by China to control internet access. Apple says the VPN apps remain available in all other markets where Apple does business. These networks are one of the most popular ways for foreign businesses in China, along with visitors, to access banned websites like Twitter, Facebook, Google. The new regulations also disrupt WhatsApp, which has provided a secure forum for sensitive communication under the Facebook umbrella. I recently spoke with Adam Segal, senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations, about China's tightening of internet access.
It's part of a long-term trend. I mean, we've certainly seen that ever since Xi Jinping has taken control, that he has tightened control over the internet and civil society more broadly. So even if this seems to be a temporary bump in front of the Party Congress coming up in the fall, I suspect that it'll continue in other ways as we push past that.
In one of the more bizarre turns, we're also seeing the blocking of online images of Winnie the Pooh, given some online commenters saying there's a likeness there between Winnie the Pooh and President Xi Jinping. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's a great example of the cat and mouse game that always happens between Chinese internet censors and Chinese users. Users come up with some way to get around the censors, either pictures or homonyms for Chinese characters. The censors figure it out, then they try to block it. It does make the Chinese leadership look a little bit, if not pathetic, then insecure that they feel that they have to block pictures of Winnie the Pooh. But it's clearly an example of this kind of arms race that happens.
WhatsApp was the one social networking chat service, U.S. or American chat service that was available in China, and now even that is partially blocked. You know, what is this signal to Facebook and Google and the other big U.S. tech companies?
Well, it's particularly bad news for Facebook. Facebook has been looking for ways to get into the China market. We know that, you know, Mark Zuckerberg has made numerous visits there, showed off his Chinese, welcomed Chinese leadership to Facebook campus. But it's clearly a sign that, you know, the Chinese are not ready to allow U.S. social media, U.S. communication companies to do very well in the Chinese market, even if they agree to some type of censorship and control.
Do you think there's anything that can change the course of these restrictions?
I don't think so under this current leadership in China. I think they've made it very clear, not only from a political control perspective, but this vision of what they call cyber sovereignty or internet sovereignty, which is that, you know, the Chinese have a right to control their internet and their cyberspace in the ways that they see fit, and that involves blocking information from the outside that they see as threatening to regime stability, and that's not going away anytime soon.
So what's next?
So I think we'll see further tightening in the run-up to the Party Congress. We may see some pushback on the VPN issue and the blocking of the virtual private networks, because they're so important to foreign businesses in China and to Chinese scholars and others who use Google Scholar to keep in touch with the most recent scientific outreach. But even if that were to happen, I think we're just going to see a continuing trend of kind of controlling, filtering, censoring of the Chinese internet.
My conversation there with Adam Segal, senior fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. Coming up, Apple earnings are less than 24 hours away. Investors waiting to hear any details on the next iPhone. We'll dig into what you need to know. And a programming note for Tuesday on Bloomberg TV, Oaktree Capital Group's Howard Marks will be on 8:30 a.m. New York time, 5:30 a.m. in San Francisco. The interview comes just a week after he sounded the alarm about FANG stocks. This is Bloomberg. Lyft has a new board member, former senior advisor to President Obama, Valerie Jarrett. She joins 8 other board members, and in a statement, she wrote that she, quote, shares a belief that reliable, affordable transportation positively impacts social mobility and improves the quality of life in densely populated communities. I am thrilled to join the ride. Well, by this time tomorrow, we will have the latest earnings report from Apple. The largest company by market cap will be giving its latest numbers on iPhone sales and a financial forecast for the next quarter ahead of the expected unveiling of Apple's newest iPhone in the fall. Bloomberg's Alex Webb follows Apple. He joins me now. So what are we expecting?
I think the biggest number that everybody's going to be looking at is the fourth quarter sales projection.
Okay.
They tend to project, and so fourth quarter for Apple is the 3 months through September. Now, they typically introduce the new iPhone somewhere in the middle of September. It might be available for a week or two in shops. Now, as we've reported, and a lot of other people have also reported, the top of the range iPhone, iPhone 8 you might call it, iPhone X, some others are calling it for the 10-year anniversary, it's possibly and probably going to be delayed. So if the forecast, the sales forecast for the next quarter is slightly below expectations, that could be a sort of implied confirmation that it's not going to be around for a few weeks or even a few months.
Right, so a few days are normally accounted for in the coming quarter of iPhone sales, but if it's pushed, those days will be in the coming quarter instead.
Exactly, yeah. So it's sort of back-loaded into the Christmas quarter rather than front-loaded into the September.
So what's the latest on the delays? This is all due to supplier issues, right?
Yes, it's there are going to be 3 new iPhones. There'll be upgrades to what we currently have, the 7 and the 7 Plus. They might be called the 7S and the 7S Plus. And these are going to have LCD screens, what currently the iPhones have. The top of the range one is going to have an OLED screen, organic light-emitting diodes. And this is technology which is actually in relatively little supply. It's quite hard to get your hands on it. There's not enough OLED out there, is what the reporting shows, to fill all of the iPhones out of the gate.
Now, this quarter is when we typically see a pause, right? And even Tim Cook has talked about this, that people might be waiting for the next phone and not upgrading as quickly, correct?
Absolutely. But sometimes people do look at it because the sales numbers, how they correlate to the expectations, the analysts' expectations, kind of serves as an indicator of how strongly the Apple brand is holding up. One of Apple's strongest assets is its brand, and sometimes people look at it compared to others. Do people, what's the kind of trend in technology? Do people really care about the underlying technology, or is the brand important enough?
What are we expecting to see when it comes to services?
Services has been the bright spot for the past 18 months or so, and what's really important for Apple about services is that it not only is more profitable than hardware, because it's software, and secondly, it builds stickiness. It makes it harder for you to ditch your iPhone. The odds are there'll be further services growth. It'll be interesting to see whether they've been able to carry on with that tear of the past 18 months or whether it slowed slightly.
And what about China? Obviously, there's increasing competition there from local smartphone makers, and Apple is in perhaps the 4th spot.
Apple, as you found in your conversation with Tim Cook from a month or two ago, I think they try to sell the message that the 7 Plus is the best-selling phone in China, and that is the message they're often trying to push. Nonetheless, the broader numbers tell a slightly different or more complex story, namely that there has been a drop-off and that they have been losing market share to competitors.
One of the things he talked about was, look, I see China for the long term. This is a long-term market for us, and we are committed to that market. Will growth elsewhere make up for anything that is lost or anything that slows down in China?
There has been a lot of talk about India, and India as being the next China. Tim Cook, I think, talked about India as being where China was 5 or 6 years ago. India, of course, does have a booming middle class. They have tried to bring to India the older models of the iPhone 5 and 5S, and those kind of slightly outdated ones, ones which very soon the software is going to leave behind. And they have brought manufacturing to India. Whether that is actually paying any dividends just yet, we will see. They don't, interestingly enough, break out the numbers for India.
So, iPhone 8 or iPhone X? What's it going to be?
I mean,
something we don't know.
If I was making the decision, I took Latin for a few years, so I would like to see the iPhone X. I think otherwise it's just iterative and it gets a bit boring. The problem is, if they go for the iPhone X, do they then have to start following Latin sort of logic and it becomes the XI and the XCV?
Or YZ. I mean, let's not be too complicated.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay, Alex Webb, who covers Apple for Bloomberg Tech, thanks so much. You'll be all over Apple earnings tomorrow. That's it for this edition of Bloomberg Technology. We are, of course, live streaming on Twitter. Check us out at Bloomberg Tech TV. Weekdays, 5 p.m. in New York, 2 p.m. in San Francisco. That's all for now. This is Bloomberg.